Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has recently taken on a much more aggressive and confrontational tone toward Russia. He's talking about inflicting massive defeats, openly discussing striking Moscow, and warning that Russia's defeat is inevitable. So in this video, we're going to take a look at several recent high-profile attacks, analyze the current situation at the front lines, and try to figure out why the language coming from Zelensky has become so bellicose and what it means for the future of the war. Let's get into it. Okay, first let's start with the major events that have been happening at the front lines and some other notable incidents, which I think have influenced Zelensky's rhetoric. Recent strikes and counterattacks, massive drone plus missile barrage by Russia on September 20th, 2025. Russia launched one of the most intense attacks yet. Approximately 580 drones and 40 missiles across multiple regions in Ukraine. 3 civilians were killed, dozens wounded. Reuters Ukraine intercepted most of the incoming drones and missiles. AP News +1 Russia says it was targeting military and industrial infrastructure, airfields, factories, transport hubs. Reuters +1 Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy and industrial infrastructure. Ukraine has carried out drone attacks on the Salyvit petrochemical complex in Russia's Bashkortostan region. Reuters' other recent attacks have targeted oil refineries and pipelines inside Russia, aiming to weaken Russia's energy revenues and war-sustaining capacity. AP News +1 Earlier in the year, Ukraine struck the Crimean Bridge underwater supports in June 2025, temporarily disrupting traffic and drawing attention to vulnerabilities in Russian supply lines. Wikipedia, the covert Operation Spiderweb, in June 2025, saw Ukrainian drones strike multiple Russian air bases deep inside Russian territory. Wikipedia, the record air attacks inside Ukraine on September 7, 2025. Russia launched what was called the largest air attack of the war. More than 800 drones plus 13 missiles. The attack reached as far as Kyiv, damaging the main government building for the first time in the war, and impacting residential areas and strategic infrastructure. At least 4 people died. Reuters +2 Al Jazeera +2 Ukrainian air defenses claimed to have shot down a large share of the drones and missiles. Reuters +2 Russian Defense Ministry statements asserted that many of the targets were military, industrial, and Reuters frontline counteroffensives and territorial shifts. Ukrainian forces are pushing in parts of Donetsk, aiming to disrupt Russian plans toward Pokrovsk and Dobropetlia. They claim to have advanced 3 to 7 kilometers in some sectors. Reuters Ukraine says it has recaptured multiple settlements and cleared others of Russian forces. Reuters on the Russian side, Moscow claims to have seized new villages in eastern fronts. Reuters, high casualties civilian strikes in smaller towns in Urova, Donetsk Oblast. A missile strike killed approximately 25 pensioners waiting for payments. That attack struck a rural location, indicating Russian targeting beyond major cities. Wikipedia, Russia's broader strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure, military, energy, transport, are often linked with power outages, structural damage, and disruption of civilian life. Reuters +1 now. If we take a look at the map, there hasn't been a huge amount of changes in the last few days. But these offensives represent an important change in Ukrainian strategy. Ukraine is looking to disrupt Russian attempts to push towards key roadways. And they're also trying to avoid direct confrontation with Russian forces stationed in large cities like Bakhmut, Donetsk, and Marinka. Instead, Ukraine is focusing its efforts on smaller towns and settlements to achieve 2 things. First, they aim to force Russia to disperse its troops and resources across a wider area, thereby reducing the intensity of attacks in specific locations. This allows Ukraine to gain ground gradually, without expending disproportionate resources. Second, by operating in less densely populated regions, Ukraine can minimize civilian casualties caused by Russian counterattacks. This helps maintain international support for Ukraine's war effort, which could be crucial as the conflict becomes increasingly protracted. Okay, so now that we've got a handle on the situation at the front lines, let's move on to the second part of the video. Why is Zelensky adopting such a confrontational tone? What does it all mean? And what should we watch out for next? Well, there are three main points here. First, there's escalation in depth and range. Russia is increasingly launching large-scale aerial assaults, drones plus missiles even deep into Ukrainian-held areas, showing willingness to stretch its reach and take risks. This includes not just targeting military infrastructure, but also energy grids, refineries, and other strategic sites. This tactic reflects a desire to inflict maximum damage on Ukraine's military capabilities and overall infrastructure. It also shows a blurring of military versus civilian targets. Note that the attacks are not only on military sites, but also on infrastructure, like the Crimean Bridge, government buildings, and energy facilities. This suggests a deliberate strategy to undermine Ukraine's war effort beyond just battlefield attrition, causing systemic damage to Ukrainian society. Also, Ukraine is striking inside Russia. The counterstrikes on Russian infrastructure and air bases shift the balance of threat, signaling Ukraine's capacity and intent to take the fight into Russian territory. This is a significant development, as it implies that no part of Russia is truly safe. This can increase pressure on Russian decision-making centers and raise the costs of the war for Russia. This pressure might extend beyond the military, affecting political and economic centers as well. For instance, striking the Salavit chemical plant inside Russia demonstrates Ukraine's ability to threaten targets deep within Russian borders. This event, along with the previous attacks on the Crimean Bridge and Russian air bases, sends a message that Ukraine can strike at various locations and infrastructure types, not just military ones. This broadens the scope of the conflict and raises the stakes for Russia, potentially forcing them to allocate more resources to defend against these attacks. Second, there's pressure on decision-making centers. By threatening to go after leadership and energy nodes, Zelensky aims to raise the stakes politically, not just militarily. Targeting symbols of power and essential services can influence the calculus of those making decisions about the war. For instance, the strikes on Russian energy facilities are not only intended to disrupt military operations, but also to send a message to the Russian political elite. These attacks highlight the vulnerability of Russia's domestic infrastructure and could potentially impact public sentiment and political will for continuing the war. Additionally, the threat to target Moscow directly carries significant weight. As the capital city, Moscow represents the heart of Russia's political and socio-economic power. Striking Moscow would not only cause severe damage to the city itself, but would also symbolize Ukraine's ability to threaten the core of Russian statehood. Such threats can influence public opinion and political dynamics within Russia, potentially pressuring decision-makers to seek alternative solutions to the conflict. Third, there's psychological signaling. Harsh warnings often serve as a form of deterrence, aiming to dissuade the opponent from taking action. In this context, Zelensky's statements about inflicting massive defeats and eliminating Putin serve as warnings to deter Russia from further aggression by emphasizing Ukraine's determination and capabilities. These statements discourage Russia from escalating the conflict or attempting larger-scale offensives. Moreover, these statements have an internal audience, boosting morale. When leaders project confidence and strength, it can rally the population behind the war effort. This is particularly important during challenging times, when resources are strained or losses are heavy. Emphasizing the inevitability of victory can help maintain public support and unity, encouraging citizens to endure hardships and continue supporting the war effort. In conclusion, Zelensky's rhetoric reflects a shift in Ukraine's approach to the war, acknowledging the gravity of the situation while maintaining defiance and determination. His statements demonstrate Ukraine's evolving strategy, one that involves targeting critical infrastructure, both militarily and economically, increasing pressure on decision-making centers, and employing psychological tactics to influence both Russia and the international community. These strategies aim to maximize the impact of Ukraine's actions on the battlefield and beyond. It'll be interesting to see how Russia responds to these new developments. If they feel compelled to respond to these threats, we may see escalatory measures further intensifying the conflict. However, if they choose to ignore these statements, it could indicate a growing sense of desperation as Ukraine continues to inflict damage on their military and infrastructure. Only time will tell which path Russia will take. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a comment. Your comments always help us improve our videos. Thanks for watching.